My name is Ron Menner. I'm the Director of Construction Safety Compliance, and I'm here with my colleagues, Chief Robert Turner and Chief Craig Hughes. And also, we're going to have our panelists answering your questions. We have Assistant Chief Christian Gandolfo. In this presentation, we will be reviewing site safety training requirements, COVID-19 safety regulations, and general safety measures for different types of construction. Bulletins, building code, and other type of regulations will be cited throughout this course. Participants should have a background knowledge and experience in construction and demolition. If you have any questions, please type in the chat box, and at the end, we will have a brief Q&A session. Any questions we don't get to answer will be posted with the presentation later for everyone to review. We have a lot of information to share with you today. At the end of today's course, participants will review and be able to explain proper COVID-19 safety protocols on construction sites and how they prevent the spread of the virus. We will discuss Local Law 196 and updated site safety requirements to ensure all workers on site safety construction sites are fully and safely trained. We will review Chapter 33 of the Building Code and other general site safety construction codes, plus demolition and gut rehab safety codes in order to mitigate hazards, to create a safe environment for workers, the public, and properties. For our agenda, we will be reviewing Local Law 196 and Site Safety Training Requirements, SST, COVID-19 job site requirements, general safety, construction safety, including high-rise, which is major buildings 10 plus stories, and low-rise, under 10 stories. Scaffolds, which will include sidewalk sheds, supported and suspended scaffolds. Also included on our agenda is demolition safety, which includes demolition plans, pre-demolition, demolition notification, demolition safety, and demolition sign-off. We will be going over what is general construction site safety, why it's important, hazard mitigation, and the most common violations. General site safety refers to safety measures that need to be taken at almost all sites, regardless if they're open, closed, or an interrupted work site. As legislation and current events evolve, so does general site safety. In 2017, Local Law 196 was signed into law, and DOB updated the training requirements for workers on construction sites. In 2020, the pandemic COVID-19 caused worker interactions and safety measures to change. What is general construction site safety? Here are some examples. Maintaining proper housekeeping, such as removing debris. Keeping and maintaining all required documents on site. Fire safety, such as fire extinguishers, must be kept on site in accordance to FD&Y. Training, making sure all construction workers on site have at least 40-hour site safety training. Responsibilities for closed and interrupted work sites. A closed site is a site that is inactive for a short period of time, with anticipation of returning in the near future. An interrupted work site is a site that is inactive for a prolonged period of time, with no anticipation nor scheduled date of return. Some of the reasons may be lacking of funding and will remain closed until they reestablish funding. Interrupted work sites must keep permits up to date, and site safety inspections shall be conducted periodically to ensure safety of the site has not been compromised. Hazard mitigation. There are 5 methods of control to mitigate hazards. Listed here are the most to least effective. Elimination, which is the most effective, to physically remove the hazard. Substitution, replace the hazard, replacing something that precedes a hazard with something that does not. Engineering controls, isolate people from the hazard, such as barricades and controlled access zones. Administrative controls, institute safe work practices, such as training, written rules, and policies. PPE, provide workers with personal protection equipment. Why is it important? In 2020, there were a total of 796 incidents. The top incidents were materials fall and struck by, which is 23%. slips, trips, and falls, which accounted for 36%, and lacerations, which accounted for 24%. Using safety measures and hazard mitigation acts as incident and injury prevention. It saves money, time, resources in the long run. The top 10 violations issued for site safety monitoring are as follows. 26% of the violations issued were due to work not conforming to the approved documents. 16% of the violation issues were due to site failure to maintain or display safety documents as required by Chapter 33. 10% of the violations are due to the construction superintendent failure to perform duties. 10% of the violations issued were due to job site fence not being maintained as per code. 9% of the violations issued were due to failure to comply with the fire code. 8% of the violations issued were due to failure to protect adjoining or adjacent property. 6% of violations issued were due to failure to maintain scaffolds as per code. 5% of the violations issued were due to failure to obtain required training. Another 5% of the violations issued were due to temporary construction fence on site was expired. And 5% of the violations issued were due to failure to install or maintain guardrails. So that's just an idea of what violations we're seeing out there, and this way you're aware of what you could do to prevent getting violations. So let's get started and discuss our first topic, Local Law 196 and site safety training. Due to the increased number of incidents in the recent years, Local Law 196 of 2017 has been implemented. As a requirement of Local Law 196, workers at job sites requiring construction superintendent, a site safety coordinator, or a site safety manager must have approved site safety training. Local Law 196 requires construction workers to have OSHA 30-hour training and an additional 10 hours of Department of Buildings approved site safety training in order to work on construction or a demolition site. Another alternative to this requirement is to have a completed 10-hour training and take an additional 30 hours of approved Department of Buildings safety training. Local Law 196 site safety training requires and can be also met by participating in the Department approved 100-hour training program. Please keep in mind, as of March 1st of 2021, the full site safety training requirements have been implemented and are being enforced. The site safety training requirement is a worker's card that shows the worker has participated in a combination of an OSHA 30, 8-hour fall protection, and a 2-hour drug and alcohol awareness training. As previously mentioned, an alternate method to meet the requirement is by taking an OSHA 10-hour training along with the following DOB approved safety trainings, which consist of an 8-hour fall protection, 8-hour Chapter 33 training, 4-hour supported scaffold training, 2-hour drug and alcohol awareness training, 4-hour general electives, and 4 hours of specialized electives. Site safety managers, coordinators, supervisors, superintendents, and designated competent persons require a 62-hour SST card. Just have to go back. The supervisor SST card could be obtained by having or taking OSHA 30-hour training, as well as taking an additional 32 hours of DOB approved elective. Site safety training cards are needed for all active construction sites requiring a site safety professional. A site safety professional is mandatory for the following. A construction superintendent is required to oversee on construction sites up to 9 stories. A site safety coordinator is required to oversee safety on construction sites 10 to 14 stories. Keep in mind that a coordinator is limited to just cover job sites 10 to 14 stories, and the site safety manager is allowed to oversee 10 stories and higher with no restrictions. A site safety manager is required to oversee safety on construction sites of buildings 15 stories and higher. 1, 2, 3 family new building constructions are exempt from SST card requirements as they do not require a safety professional to be on site. Below is a link to the Department of Buildings online map that shows active construction sites with site safety professionals requirement Anybody can verify if this site requires an SST card. I'll just let you look at that. If you like, you can copy that. Local Law 196 identifies who requires safety training, as the list shows. Construction superintendents, site safety coordinators, site safety managers, competent persons, and construction workers are just to name a few. However, please note, it also shows employees of DOB licensees and employees of the DOB registrants. If a DOB licensee or registrant has workers accompanying them to a construction site, they are actively engaging in construction activities. Those unlicensed workers must be fully trained to work along with the DOB licensee and registrant. The New York City Department of Small Business Services offer free site safety training from the following partner organizations listed. For first-time construction workers, they can actually go to the Work One Career Center Network link. For day laborers, the 5 boroughs each have a center dedicated to helping workers to obtain the required trainings. Interested construction workers can register for more information by clicking on the link for the Career Discovery website. Day laborers who register with the site will be directed to one of the day labor organizations listed above. The Department of Small Businesses Service issues a full site safety training card that represents an individual has completed the 40 hours of required training to be on the designated SST construction work sites. Individuals who want to obtain the Department of Small Businesses Services site safety training card can do so by meeting one of the 2 criteria mentioned previously. Local Law 196 also identifies workers who don't require safety training. That list includes building site owners, developers, project managers and construction managers, delivery persons, flag persons, special inspections consulants, security officers, and service technicians, just to name a few. Here we are showing a few do's and don'ts for our site safety professionals. Do consists of items as signing the logbooks every day, maintaining a presence on the site while work is being performed, designating someone as a competent person in the absence of a construction super. Keep in mind, construction supers are the only ones that can designate a competent person for their sites. When a construction super designates a competent person, they need to indicate who specifically is the competent person during their absence in the logbook. They must also have them sign and acknowledge that they are the competent person before leaving the site. Please note, the person picked to be the competent person must have the required supervisor's site safety card, training card. We will be discussing this in the upcoming slides. Additionally, site safety coordinators and site safety managers are required to maintain a presence during all construction activities. For don'ts, we want to remind you not to forget to sign the logbook. This is very important. It shows you were on site and performed your duties. Construction superintendents shall not leave the sites without first designating a competent person. Construction superintendents shall not leave the sites without documenting the competent person that is taking over for them. This is very important, and we can't stress this enough. Site safety coordinators and site safety managers cannot leave the site during construction activities. A competent person can't just be anybody. A competent person is one who has a 62-hour site safety training supervisor's card and is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards in the surroundings or working conditions which are unsanitary or hazardous to the employees, and who has authorization to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. Some do's to be aware of if you're selected as a competent person. You do need to maintain a safety presence at all times. Stay on site during active construction or until you are relieved from duty. Be knowledgeable in the construction activities being performed. Keep up to date on trainings. Keep up to date on new means and methods. Stop any unsafe activities. And some of the don'ts for being a competent person is don't ignore safety regulations. Don't leave the site without being relieved. Don't be inexperienced or a novice. Don't take on more than you can handle. Don't be afraid to report issues or concerns. Remember, safety is everyone's priority. Moving along, we will now discuss COVID-19 New York State guidelines as it relates to active construction sites. We will cover in the following slides the site requirements as well as precautions you, as a worker, should take when working at an active construction site. Keep in mind, this should all be in place prior to you reporting to work by the employer. However, you should know what is required and how you can protect yourself and your coworkers from COVID. This will ensure the virus does not continue to get passed along. So let's get started. All employees are required to register and follow the New York State guidance prior to opening the construction site. These guides are set up for everyone's safety. These include completing and submitting the New York State Business Affirmation, and it must be posted at every individual active job site. Develop and maintain a COVID-19 site safety plan. Designate a COVID-19 site safety manager. Develop and maintain a COVID-19 communication plan. Develop and maintain a cleaning log. Develop and maintain a contact log. Post and maintain signage that is consistent with the Department of Health COVID-19 guidance. And as a reminder, all workers are required to wear face coverings unless medically prohibited. Compliance with the COVID-19 guidance also requires hoist and elevators to have an occupancy no greater than 50% of the maximum allowable occupancy. A sign must be posted in each cab and at every landing stating the occupancy limit. A hand hygiene station with soap, water, and paper towels or hand sanitizer available on site, and signs reminding everybody to physically distance 6 feet apart when possible. This is an example of what the New York State Business Affirmation looks like. Again, this should be posted on the site as required to be site specific for every job site. Part of the safety template, the owner is required to provide all the information and the precautions they will take for all active sites. The plans are specific to each construction site. To name a few, each plan will identify the persons responsible to ensure compliance with the COVID-19 site safety plan, the owner information, along with their contact information. Within the plan, the owner shall explain how the workers will be properly self-distancing, how meetings will be conducted safely, social distancing markers placed in common spaces, limit the in-person gatherings, designated areas for pickup and deliveries, and post signage throughout the site, consistent with New York City Department of Health mental hygiene guidance. As hygiene is a key element in protecting everyone, the plan should include the cleaning information, identify who is responsible for maintaining the cleaning logs, and when the areas are clean along with their frequencies. Remember, the best way to protect yourself is to wash your hands frequently with hot water and soap or use hand sanitizer. When you return to an active construction site, the employer is required to provide all employees with proper PPE. They can consist of a mask, eye coverings, and gloves. But keep in mind, all items are not to be shared with anybody else. Limiting sharing objects like tools or work gloves. Hand tools should be sanitized before sharing them with somebody else. Part of the signs that you see around the construction site are also part of the COVID-19 safety plan. The employees are required to identify them and post them as required. It's your job to follow them to ensure your safety as well as everybody else's safety. When you're on a site, you need to follow these signs to the best of your ability. Also, notify your employer if you test positive at any time. It's important that you tell them so others, which may have been close contact with, can get tested for COVID and vice versa. Keep in mind that COVID-19 site safety manager is to be designated on every site. This role could be performed by site safety personnel, such as a construction super, site safety coordinator, site safety manager, or anyone with a site presence, including a construction worker. If you're going to be that person responsible for this role, ensure you know the tasks that you will need to perform and to always keep you and everybody safe. Now, let's go into general site safety. We will be discussing high-rise and low-rise construction, scaffolds, and sidewalk sheds, excavation, gut rehab, and interior demo. Now let's start discussing site safety for high-rise and low-rise construction sites. All right, construction oversight. Construction superintendent is required during construction or demo of buildings less than 10 stories. They can designate a competent person to act in their place. They must visit their sites at least once daily and can manage up to 10 sites on their license. They have the ability to order or direct corrective actions of unsafe conditions. The site safety manager is required during construction or demo of major buildings. They cannot designate a competent person. They are required to remain on site at all times. They notify the responsible parties of any unsafe conditions, and they note it in the site safety log. In Building Code 3307.6.2, sheds are an important part of site safety and is required when the planned building reaches the height of the proposed shed, which is generally at the second story. Sheds need to be inspected daily and must be ensured that they are in compliance. We will go more into shed details further into this presentation. In Building Code 3301.7, documentation. All required on-site documentation must always be available on site for DOB inspectors. Documents should be located in one area, such as a field office, trailer, or shanty. Workers on site shall wear appropriate PPE at all times, such as a hard hat, face mask, and safety gloves. Safety glasses. Some important items to note. When erecting or demolishing a building, adjoining buildings shall be protected from damage during construction operations. Protections for roofs, chimneys, skylights, mechanical equipment are just a few items covered in Chapter 3309.1. In Building Code 3305.2.5, taglines. When hoisting materials such as structural members, taglines shall be used to prevent uncontrolled movements. In Building Code 3301.11.1, site safety orientation. This shall be provided to all employees prior to allowing them engage in construction or demo operations. Okay, just hold on 1 second. Okay, when erecting and demolishing buildings, adjoining buildings shall be protected for damage. During construction operations, protecting roofs, chimneys, skylights, and mechanical equipment, just a few. Low-rise and high-rise safety oversight. In Building Code 3309.8 are requirements for adjoining walls for construction or demolition operation that exposes or breaches adjoining property walls. The walls must maintain the structural integrity and make all necessary repairs. In demo, all pockets, open beam holes must be filled and ensured proper anchorage. In addition, all required fire exits and passageways must be maintained or provide substitution as per code. The person causing the construction or demolition operation shall cover the expense. Notification requirement, as in 3309.1.1. Where a construction or demolition project will require access to an adjoining property, written notification shall be provided to the property owner at least 60 calendar days prior to the commencement of work. The notification needs to describe the work necessary, schedule, and the duration, plus any inspections or monitoring details, and provide all necessary protection. 3309.3, when permission is obtained, if the physical inspection by the person causing the construction or demolition operations prior to commencement and at reasonable periods during the work, observed conditions must be documented and available to the department upon request. Site safety oversight, netting and guardrails. Building Code 3308.6.1.1, horizontal netting when required. Construction of new buildings and for vertical and horizontal alterations of existing buildings when the uppermost walkable floor reaches a height of 6 stories or 75 feet above the ground level or an adjoining roof. In concrete structures, more than 2 stories below the stripping floor or 30 feet. In steel structures, at the uppermost story where the construction slab has been poured. The purpose of horizontal netting is to catch falling materials and debris and not arrest the fall of a worker. Clean out horizontal netting and debris and materials daily as per Building Code 3308.6.2.111. And when cleaning netting, be sure to use a controlled access zone below. The guardrail system. A guardrail system shall be installed and maintained to protect all unenclosed perimeters and not required at the story or grade. Guardrail system must contain the following: toe boards, which shall be a 1/4 inch off the ground and at least 3.5 inches high, as not to allow any loose materials or tools to be kicked off the edge. A top rail shall be able to withstand 200 pounds of downward and outward force and located no less than 39 inches above the ground, and a mid rail provided halfway between the top rail and the bottom. Mesh netting shall be secure and taut. This picture shows an unsecured guardrail with the mid rail improperly placed and loose mesh netting. You wouldn't obviously want to rely on that to pause any workers from getting hurt on the site. 3308.5, vertical netting shall be installed and maintained to cover all unenclosed perimeters below the floor on which horizontal netting is required. Vertical netting must be secured and kept closed at all times, except during the actual loading operations or perimeter construction operations. In section 3308.5.3, cable requirements. The netting should be secured with non-corrosive wire capable of withstanding a load of at least 200 pounds applied in every direction assessed upwards. The cable height must be 60 inches, also at 42 inches and 21 inches, and 0 inches above the level of the floor, known as a zero cable. When installed at the roof level, the roof mesh netting shall be secured and taut. Horizontal netting. Netting is taut as per BC 3308.5.4. Structural netting needs to comply with ANSI 810.11 per Building Code 3302.1. Compliance with ANSI standards should be labeled on the equipment and material. Can also be determined by the contracting the manufacturer. Make sure horizontal, vertical, and alternate netting are in compliance with the design drawings, manufacturer recommendations, and BC 3308. Housekeeping. All floors, roofs, and working decks shall be cleaned of debris at least daily. Any debris that cannot be removed from the site by the end of the day, end of the shift, shall be placed in approved metal containers and be removed from the site at the beginning of the next shift. As per section 3303.4.4, combustible materials and debris shall not accumulate and be removed from the site at reasonable intervals in accordance with the requirements of the New York City Fire Code. Building Code 3303.4.4, control of debris. All floors, roofs, and working decks shall be cleaned of debris at least once daily. Any debris cannot be removed from the site by the end of the shift will be placed in approved metal containers. As per section 3303.5, combustible materials and debris shall be removed as per New York City Fire Code. This slide is not a New York City code and is an OSHA requirement, keeping that the workers protected from the weather. Be sure workers are adequately protected from weather-related injuries, such as cold stress, heat stress, and hypothermia. On cold days, sometimes above 40 degrees Fahrenheit, depending upon other weather conditions, workers become susceptible to cold stress and should stay hydrated, dress warmly, and stay dry. On hot days, interpretation can vary depending upon conditions, such as humidity and sun. Workers can become susceptible to heat stress and should stay hydrated. Take breaks outside of the sun and monitor the way they feel. Some important signs to recognize and monitor for heat stress are dizziness, fatigue, heavy sweating, confusion, thirst, and nausea. Closed and interrupted work sites. Building Code 3303.4.5.2. Make sure to secure all materials such as lumber or sheetrock to prevent them from moving in adverse weather conditions such as wind. In Building Code 3303.3, sites over 5,000 square feet must provide a watch person. An additional watch person is necessary for each additional 40,000 square feet. Ensuring all netting, both vertical and horizontal, is maintained and pipe scaffold netting is properly secured. Continuation of closed and interrupted sites. Performing housekeeping as per Building Code 3303.4. Perform a walkthrough and provide a full cleanup of the site to remove all debris and remove all tripping hazards for the public. Ensure proper lockout tagout procedures for cranes, derricks, hoists, and heavy machinery on site. Building Code 3303.14 requires all accumulated water shall be pumped out when necessary. Okay, here we're comparing different sites and how the fences were maintained. The picture on the left shows a properly installed and maintained construction fence. The fence is 8 foot high, is built solid, painted hunter green, and has viewing panels at every 25 linear feet. It meets all other requirements as specified by the code. The picture on the right, as we can see, is not properly installed nor maintained as it has collapsed. Fence to be locked and secured. There should be not be any gaps, breaks in the fences that allow people to break in, and it should protect the public from entering the site after hours. Now, I'm going to introduce our Construction Safety Compliance Chief, Greg Hughes. He'll be continuing our presentation, starting with the common violations issued at job sites.
Thank you, Ron. That was very informative. Now we're going to take a look, as Ron said, at some of the common violations issued to high-rise and low-rise sites. So our common violations most commonly issued are for adequate housekeeping, missing guardrails, the fall protection basically, site safety manager, site safety coordinator, or construction superintendent logs that are not adequately kept. Many times we note they are missing the pre-shift meetings, haven't been logged in, or that the safety measures have not been inspected and unsafe conditions mitigated. You know, as Ron had mentioned earlier, that it is required for site safety managers to make the proper notification. That goes for the managers and the coordinators. And this is the big difference between the license between a site safety manager and a construction superintendent, because the construction superintendent has the authority to take direct corrective measures. They can order the workers to repair the condition. And that's another key reason why you cannot transfer those licenses. A site safety manager cannot fill the responsibilities of a construction superintendent on a project that requires a construction superintendent's license. And likewise, a construction superintendent cannot pull a job that requires a site safety manager, because they do have different obligations under those licenses. So for example, if a site safety manager would like to work at a construction superintendent's job in between jobs, they would either need to be named by the existing construction superintendent as a competent person in the logbook, or shelve the site safety manager's license and have a construction superintendent's license issued to them. The next common violation is that the job site fence is not constructed or maintained per code. Everybody's received these, especially if the site is interrupted for any period of time. Often the wind or other issues cause the fences to deteriorate, and they really do need to be inspected periodically to make sure that they're maintaining their integrity. Advertisements and business signs are another big one on the fences, and this is one where I know it's tough for the industry to take control of, because a lot of those billboard posts just come out overnight, throw placards and everything else up on your fences, but it is your responsibility to get them down or paint over them. Otherwise, you're risking violations. And then, of course, work without a permit. Permits expire all the time. You have to be diligent in making sure that your permits are up to date and current, or you will get those violations for expired permits. Failure to protect all persons and property affected by construction operations. That's a big one. And we know that happens because within the code is the requirement for, by 3301.1, I just want to quote that for you. The provisions of, and this is the opening for chapter 33, the provisions of this chapter shall govern the conduct of all construction or demolition operations with regard to the safety of the public and property. It then continues to state, for regulations relating to the safety of persons employed in construction or demolition operations, OSHA standards shall apply. What that means is if a worker is injured, we can quote the section that was violated in OSHA under this as our violation, our code requiring that you had complied with those provisions. And then the next very common one is failure to have the site safety manager or site safety coordinator present on site where required. And for the low rise, that would be for not having the designated construction superintendent or competent person. This is a big one because we have found that when they are present, there are fewer incidents and accidents. So please be diligent in assuring that all your sites are properly staffed and manned. Work without a permit, most commonly done under the expired permit again. As I mentioned before, this is a duplicative, but it's good to reinforce it. Stay diligent on maintaining your records so that your permits are kept up to date. Now we're going to move into talking about scaffolds and sidewalk sheds. And when we speak about scaffolds, obviously, we're going to be speaking in terms of both suspended and supported scaffolds. Scaffolds and sidewalk sheds training each have unique training requirements. For example, on the supported scaffolds, you are required to have a 4-hour user certificate if you're going to be working on top of the working deck of the scaffold, working on the building. If you're going to be altering the supported scaffold, changing it in any way, installing it or removing it, even moving the planks around, you need a 32-hour supported scaffold erector certificate. For the suspended scaffolds, you'll need the 16-hour scaffold training is required for workers who install, remove, maintain, repair, or use the scaffolds. And again, for the setup of the Suspended scaffolds that require outrigger beams and counterweights, you will need to have that supervised by a 32-hour rigger suspended scaffold certificate, somebody possessing one of those. So now we move on. I'm sorry, that was me. Scaffolds and sidewalk sheds training. Notification. So be sure to follow the code requirements for notifications, approvals, and permits for suspended and supported scaffolds. Remember, when brackets of C-hooks are to be used on parapets, be sure to have a licensed PE or RA inspect the parapet for stability and provide a letter attesting to the structural stability of the parapet to the scaffold installer. If you're using a supported scaffold, make sure that you're up to date, and of course, notification of at least 24 hours, but no more than 48 hours prior to the first installation, and final removal of suspended scaffolds is required. The suspended scaffolds often require the CD5. However, if it's part of a new building, they may be part of the actual new building plans, so that they're detailed there. Now we move on to the requirements for maintaining these scaffolds. And the inspections required daily is that you'll inspect the working deck of a supported scaffold to assure it's fully planked. Overhangs are between the 6-inch minimum and 18-inch maximum, and that the planks are tightly fit together. And that's for the working deck of the supported scaffold. The scaffold, it has to be secured to the building prior to the start of work, clearly. This should be checked in the daily inspection by the competent person prior to use, that none of the tiebacks are loose or deteriorating. The site safety monitoring program per BC 3314.3.2 concerning the suspended scaffolds, the scaffold must be shown the location on the site safety plan and built in accordance with the pertaining documentation. Scaffold designs are designed by a licensed professional, and that's a code requirement per BC 3314.3.2. Scaffolds, conditions on scaffolds change daily. Be sure to conduct and record all required inspections to assure the scaffold is safe. Scaffold inspections require that pre-shift inspections to be conducted daily before use, and that applies to both suspended and supported. Both types of scaffolds need an inspection after installation and after any modifications, repairs, or adjustments. All of those inspections need to be documented and logged into the inspection logbook. Inspection shall be conducted by a competent person and logged in their logbook. Now, the competent person in this case is not necessarily the one named by the construction superintendent, but rather it's the one that would be trained by the scaffold installer or the GC specifically for inspecting the scaffolds. Scaffold atop a sidewalk shed needs to be on the site safety plan. Sidewalk sheds shall be heavy duty per BC 3307.6.4.2, I'm sorry. And again, The housekeeping we're talking about is really important on decks and the approaches to the scaffolds. You do not want anyone falling, tripping, or getting injured because the access to retrieve them is often very difficult. That's why you really want to maintain that and be diligent in keeping an eye on the workers on those scaffolds, that they're not creating debris piles or running their lines across where others can trip or get injured. All supported scaffolds obviously are constructed with flame resistant or flame retardant materials. Now we're going to talk about some of the safety measures on the scaffold itself. On suspended scaffolds, be sure your lifelines are properly anchored and tied with a bowline knot at the anchor point. Be sure the code compliant guardrail system is in place on all working decks, including the platform of the suspended scaffold. Make sure adequate fall protections are being followed. As I said, for the personal fall arrest systems, that's the lifeline on the suspended scaffolds. The workers shouldn't be attaching them, obviously, to the scaffold itself. They have to be down to a secured anchor point on the roof. Horizontal netting shall not be used for falling debris. It is not an adequate means of fall protection for workers, as per BC 3308.6.2. And guardrails on scaffolds shall have a top rail and toe board on the suspended scaffolds. And remember, on the supported scaffolds, the cross bracing does act as a mid-rail. This is an important issue here, and we know how many times the wind has caused incidents, especially on those suspended scaffolds. That's why anytime the wind gusts exceed 30 miles an hour, you should not be using, you shall not use that scaffold. Scaffold components being intermixed is another big problem. Scaffold components manufactured by different manufacturers cannot be mixed. That's per OSHA. And while there is the possibility through design, it's really recommended that you follow that regulation diligently. You want to make sure the footing is sound and the scaffold is not overloaded. That you have a competent person who inspects the scaffold prior to use. And once again, just a reminder, when we speak of competent person here, we're talking someone competent in the scaffold area, somebody with a 32-hour erector card in the case of the supported scaffolds, or the 16-hour card for the suspended. And the inspection results, as I mentioned before, must be documented. When is a sidewalk shed required? So when performing work that requires a sidewalk shed, the sidewalk shed shall be installed before the commencement of such work and removed once that work is complete, per BC 3307.6.2. Now, sidewalk sheds are not required when pedestrian walkways are completely closed, or if other means of overhead protection are provided, usually via a CCD1. It's not often that you'll see them. Generally, they do require it. And remember, on major buildings, those are buildings 10 stories or greater, the removal of the sidewalk shed requires a DOB approval. Buildings that are less than 10 stories would only require DOB approval if an unsafe local law 11 filing status is on record with the department. Otherwise, those sidewalk sheds can be removed with a 24 to 48 hour notification of removal to the department. When erecting a sidewalk shed, it's obviously designed by a design professional, and it must cover the entire pedestrian walkway with an additional 5 feet lengthwise to either side for work up to 100 feet in height, and an additional 20 feet for work greater than 100 feet in height. Beneath the sidewalk shed, you must provide a clear path of at least 5 feet wide and 8 foot tall per BC 3307.2.6 and 3307.6.4.7. When must the shed be erected? Sorry, that was from the last slide. When a sidewalk is located immediately below a scaffold, mast climber, or chute, you must erect the shed. When a structure higher than 40 feet or greater is to be constructed and the sidewalk is within a perpendicular distance from the new structure that is equal to or less than half the height of the new structure. When any portion of the facade is to be constructed, altered, maintained, or repaired, or vertical or horizontal enlargement is to occur at a height of 40 feet or more above the curb level. When a structure higher than 25 feet is to undergo a full demolition, or when exterior partial demolition or other than that performed in conjunction with the construction, alteration, maintenance, or repair of a facade is to occur at a height greater than 25 feet. And remember, the shed on those buildings that are going up, new buildings that are going up above 40 feet, that shed needs to be erected the minute the work exceeds the height of the shed. So remember, the site the shed is to be placed on should be inspected to account for any special adjustments such as ADA ramps, driveways, bus stops, subway entries, etc. You really need to look at that so that you can properly design the shed in the plans. Check that the platform, when inspecting the shed post-installation, you want to check the platforms are fully planked and the sidewalk shed is as close to the facade as possible. Has to be within 1 inch, and if there's any gap, that needs to be sealed. Sidewalk shed shall be designed by a registered design professional, as I just said, and the exception is sidewalk sheds prescribed and approved by the Commissioner or the Board of Standards and Appeals, BSA number 351-74 SM, may be filed by an unregistered applicant. Again, if you're going to do such, make sure that there are no special provisions required to account for site conditions that the standard designs may not have accounted for. When hoisting over the sidewalk or working with a suspended scaffold, provide warning signs where special danger exists. When conducting operations open to the public, a flagged person must be present and operating. Sidewalk sheds must be ADA compliant per BC 3307.6, I'm sorry, 0.2.6. Ramps provided when there is a change in elevation greater than 1 inch. Ramps that rise more than 6 inches have handrails, and that they have mirrors at all blind corners. If the construction is over 100 feet in height, be sure to use a heavy-duty sidewalk shed per BC 3307.6.4.2. Outer sides and end of sidewalk shed should be 3.5 feet in height. That's basically the shed parapet per BC 3307.6.4. Make sure sidewalk shed is not obstructing egress of the fire escapes, that it's not obstructing Department of Transportation street signs, nor driveways. Be sure to visually inspect the sidewalk shed daily and follow up with more thorough inspections every 6 months on sheds that are just placed up for issues where there was a maintenance issue on the facade where active work may not be occurring and it may not be subject to the daily inspection. Be sure to maintain the deck. You shouldn't have any storage or debris, and make sure that it's swept daily. Again, storage is only allowed if designed in the shed and noted on the permit. Be sure to maintain all required documents on site, including permits and drawings. All sidewalk sheds require a permit from DOB per BC 3307.6.1. So documents required for the sidewalk shed must also be kept on site. And that includes the electrical permit, the approved design drawing, the plot plan, and the design loads of the shed. Be sure the sidewalk shed is painted hunter green and there are no private business signs. Again, those signs can get very costly to the contractor. If it's a special operations unit that goes out and it's an outdoor advertising sign, not a business accessory sign, those violations are starting at $10,000 each and usually are issued to the general contractor, the permit holder, and the building owner as well. So be diligent in making sure that your sheds are free of advertising signs, no private business signs. Ensure any and all light fixtures are vandal proof. Now we're going to talk, once again, we're going to review again the removal and how to go about it. And this is for the sidewalk sheds from a major building site, to remove it from a major building site. Make sure that all work has been completed above the second floor, that there is no longer need for temporary construction equipment or structures. That means when we're talking about that, that's also on the adjoining properties, all right? Make sure any roof protection placed on adjoining property has been removed. Have debris-free roofs and setbacks. Contact the construction safety compliance for a removal request, and you'll put that request in through the form that we provide you, the appointment request, the construction safety compliance appointment request form. Once that is received, we'll schedule the inspection, and if you pass the inspection, you'll be able to go ahead and notify for removal and complete the removal. For non-major buildings, those less than 10 stories, again, 24 to 48 hour notice prior to removal. If the building is subject to local law 11, remember that they must assure that the last filing, it was not as an unsafe facade filing. If it is an unsafe facade filing, then they would have to contact our facades unit to get permission to remove the shed. Scaffolds and sidewalk sheds. Now we're going to go in and begin to discuss what happens and what your requirements are for sheds that are closed at closed sites. If a sidewalk shed is designed and approved to be used for storage, then such materials and equipment should be secured prior to closing the site for the day, for the night, for the weekend. Winds and other loads should be taken into consideration when designing sidewalk sheds per BC 3307.6.4.2.1. Netting should be checked for holes and tears. This way, materials and equipment cannot fall off scaffolds, endangering the public. And even the netting itself can become a hazard if it's torn to the point of being dislocated or dislodged from the scaffold itself. Failure to maintain the scaffold in the code. Now we're going to go over some of the common violations issued to scaffolds that are not code compliant. So the first one is from BC 3314, the general provision. Failure to maintain the scaffold in a code compliant manner, not altering it so it's no longer, so it's not built contrary to the drawings. Scaffold built and maintained in use contrary to plans. Erected or installed supported scaffold 40 feet or higher without a permit. And failure to notify to the department prior to use in the case of suspended scaffolds. We'll continue with the common violations. Here's a big one. Failure to perform safe, proper inspection of suspended scaffold. Remember, the suspended scaffold, there must be a log of each inspection conducted prior to use. Often our inspectors show up, they're working on top of the platform of the suspended scaffold. They go to the daily logbook, and there's no recorded pre-use inspection there. When you erect, dismantle, repair, maintain, modify, or remove supported scaffold without a scaffold certificate, we're specifically talking about the 32-hour card. We have come on sites, obviously, where people helping to remove the scaffold, take it down, dismantle it. We check for their certifications, and lo and behold, they only have a 4-hour user card. They shouldn't have been helping with the removal or the putting up of that scaffold. And additionally, following that, obviously, is we'll see people working on the scaffold, perhaps doing some pointing or other basic types of construction, and they don't have their user certificate. They shouldn't even be allowed to be working on top of the scaffold. Failure to provide or use a lifeline while working on a scaffold, and again, this is on the suspended scaffolds. You gotta have a lifeline, and you gotta be hooked into it. Winds, anything can happen, and without that lifeline, you are subject to possible serious injury and death. And here we see a couple of examples. I want to really go to the one on the right, where we have that mistake. Now, they tried to put in some anti-chafing, but unfortunately, it's not located in the right position. And that's really important. The user of the lifeline in the photo to the right failed to properly position the anti-chafing safeguard. And if that is not in the right spot, just the wear and tear over one day can tear through that rope and be in for an unpleasant event should there be an incident or an accident on that scaffold. So, scaffolds and sidewalk sheds violations, pedestrians protection is not per code. And examples of that are when sidewalk sheds are not planked adequately, sidewalk shed is not ADA compliant, meaning that they may have a component which is obstructing or blocking the corner where the DOT has put in ADA ramp. We have seen where they've placed footings down, obstructing that. You want to make sure those are maintained clear. That's why earlier we talked about the importance of visiting the site so that you make sure in the design to accommodate all of those slight changes. We also know that the subways are putting in many handicap lifts to be ADA compliant, to get persons down to the platforms. You do not want to obstruct those in any way, shape, or form. Failure to maintain adequate, and also that the sidewalk shed is not adequately illuminated. Now, during the day, obviously, it's illuminated because of sunlight most often. In the evening is when most of those are issued. However, if there is no illumination provided at all, we can make the assumption then that at night illumination is not going to be there. So even the inspectors during the day will issue that violation if there is none provided and there's no electrical permit to help illuminate that. They would really have to prove or observe that the street or the building's lighting system is covering it adequately. Failure to maintain adequate housekeeping. If there's any debris piles or storage on top of those sheds, you're going to see a violation for that. And it's really important too, because remember, if there is an incident in the building, very often the fire department, first responders will be going on top of those sheds in extreme conditions. And you do not want to put them at risk of impeding their ability to formulate rescue. Work without a permit. It's primarily the expired permits. So often the shed permits do expire. They must be maintained and kept up to date. Another common one is just not putting it up. It's so important anytime you have that work occurring above 40 feet. If you have a maintenance issue on the building where a sidewalk shed would be required, get it up or you will be fined. Work does not conform to the approved plans or documents. Again, carefully inspect your sheds and make sure that the plans that are on site for us to review, that shed complies with that schematic. How often we see them altered and they fail to notify the designer to note the alteration. It's the responsibility of the permit holder to make sure that the shed does conform to the plan. Now we're going to move into excavations. Safety begins with careful planning and communication. This subject alone could be an 8-hour course. So we're just going to be going with broad brushstrokes over it. As I said, you want to make sure that you communicate adequately to all parties and have proper documentation of that communication on site. Be sure to have all, you can put it into a trailer, a gang box, but have it where the site safety licensee knows where to get it right away. They should really be making sure that it's maintained. Site safety manager logs, your supportive excavation drawings, manufacturer's specs for your equipment, your site safety plan, copies of your permits, your special inspection reports for supportive excavation, that it was inspected as it went in so that you can begin the full excavation once all protection is in place. Pre-construction and monitoring surveys, another very important aspect of the documents that must be kept on site. Be sure to have your excavation monitoring plans on site per BC 3309.4. Now, with all of your safeguards, you also want to make sure that you're protecting the public from tripping hazards, such as a dewatering hose or other conduits and pipes or extension cords. with either ramps or raising it above 8 feet from the ground to prevent the tripping hazards per BC 3303.4.1.2. Notification. Multiple entities may require notification before excavation begins. Be sure to follow all applicable rules and codes. From dialing 811 to contacting the DOB, or if you need, additionally, you may need to contact DEP, sometimes even the MTA if it's within 200 feet of any surface rail system. You must make that notification at least 24 to 48 hours. Depending on the depth and location of the excavation, other city agencies may require notification in addition to DOB. Work within 200 feet of a subway or surface rail systems require notifications and approval of the controlling agency prior to permit issuance, whether it's the MTA, Metro North, whichever one that rail system is associated with. Per BC 3304.3.3, DEP shall be notified prior to the commencement of an excavation deeper than 50 feet is proposed in the Bronx above 135th Street in Manhattan, or if it's deeper than 100 feet, it's proposed in Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island, or below 135th Street in Manhattan. Note, obtaining a permit from DEP does not rate the notification requirement to the Department of Buildings. Notification to the adjoining property owners. As you can see on the picture to the right, that's a slide where the earthwork actually caused severe damage to the adjoining building. That took quite a bit to remedy. Permit holders must notify the adjoining property owner no less than 10 days prior to the commencement of earthwork. Excavations 5 to 10 feet in depth, where the property is within 10 feet. Excavations over 10 feet in depth, where the adjoining property is any distance away. Notification shall be in writing and shall include a description of the work to be performed, the time frame and schedule, and this is important, the contact information of the person causing the excavation and of the Department of Buildings through 311. Housekeeping at excavation sites. Just as in general site safety, excavations must be properly maintained. You really need to ask yourself, do you have adequate staffing of laborers for the number of trades and workers operating on that day? Has that been provided? Very often you have more trades and stuff, especially when you are doing, as in the picture on the right, that was a gut rehab where they were doing an excavation. It caused a partial collapse, but part of the problem with the workers getting out safely was the amount of debris and the housekeeping that was there. And when we look, what do you find out? Only 2 laborers with about 14 workers. Not a good ratio. So once again, you must make sure, as previously mentioned in this general site safety, combustible material and debris shall not pile up at all. Debris and materials that expose to the public shall not be piled up over 3 feet per BC 3303.4.7. Clear areas accessible to the public of all ice, snow, grease, equipment, debris, etc. per BC 3303.4.1.1. In order to maintain good housekeeping, sites should have a sufficient amount of debris containers like waste dumpsters to keep up with debris. We mentioned that. Monitoring and underpinning. As you can see on the photo, That slide shows the danger of not taking into account the importance of staggering pin seams to avoid compromising existing pins. If the trenching exceeds the width and depth of an existing pin seam, remember to provide support for that pin. Monitoring plans are required, as noted on the slide, for buildings within a distance from the edge of the excavation that is equal to or less than the maximum depth of the excavation. And in historic areas, historic structures that are within 90 feet from the edge of an excavation site must be monitored. Site shall underpin where necessary in order to protect the adjoining property. Excavations deeper than 5 feet require a means of support along the excavation per BC 3304.4. Assure the support of the excavation operations begin and are adequately in place before exceeding the 5-foot depth threshold. Whichever method of support is to be used, it must be detailed on the support of excavation plans. The code does not specify which means of support is required, but does indicate what must be included and considered when preparing the SOE plan. So they must be site-specific, illustrate all related protection for all sides of the excavation or embankment, show the extent of all work dimensions, show all utilities and public infrastructure impacted, and include the specific location and dimensions of the means of support, whether it be sloping, shoring, stepping, also known as benching, sheeting, bracing, the guardrails, fences, etc. When excavated, when underpinning is at the perimeter of the site, there must be proper support to prevent soil loss and collapse of sidewalks and adjoining properties. As you can see, that crack that's occurring there, one of the things that we really want to encourage everyone is when you see that beginning to form, you should, as you can see, the vehicle barriers are put up, but you should barricade off an area at least half the distance of the height away from those cracks in case of failure, so no one goes sliding in. Make sure there's at least, all excavations require a means of egress. OSHA requires that a means of egress be within 25 feet lateral travel distance of workers in the excavation to access it. In order to achieve this, sites may move ladders due to logistic reasons and limit where workers can work within the excavation. Those types of movements and stuff should be noted as a minor revision on the site safety plan by the site safety manager or construction super, as long as it is in compliance with Article 110 of Title 28. That's what shows you what should be included on a site safety plan. Workers shall be wearing appropriate personal protective equipment at all times, especially typically include the hard hat, a face mask, safety glasses, gloves, proper work boots. Workers shall have their training cards on them while on site. Remember, those sites that are an excavation require that they have the 40-hour minimum. After rainfall and other hazard increasing events, the excavation should be inspected to ensure the structural integrity of the sides of the excavation are maintained. Awareness and attention to the site conditions and activity requires diligence from the parties responsible for site safety, meaning all of us, from workers through to the AORs, applicant of records, by making sure plans are complete with sequencing and key requirements noted on plans. Obviously, after a rainfall, you want to begin pumping as required. It's important to note that drowning has occurred in only 3 inches of water. A worker knocked unconscious from a falling object may land in the pooling water with their head turned to the side. 3 inches of water cover the nose and cause the drowning. And this goes with what I just said. You really want to pay attention to your site. Make sure that anything that is an apparent hazard, take a look. Don't just go running into excavations. Make sure that your surrounding areas are safe, that the rebar is capped where necessary per OSHA regulations. All protruding reinforcing steel onto and into which employees could fall shall be guarded to eliminate the hazard of impalement. And then obviously workers operating cranes, excavators, and other heavy machinery have proper training and certification. Guardrail systems are required for excavations greater than 6 feet. So that's standard from the same one, the site safety. You'll know that they need the top rail, which can withstand 200 pounds of downward and outward force, a mid rail, and a toe board that is no more than 1/4 inch off the ground. The height of the top rail cannot be more than 39 inches above. If netting is being used, it shall be secure and torn. Now we're going to discuss closed and interrupted sites. Holes in the ground are inherently hazardous. Backfilling may be expensive. However, it is the safer option if the plans for a new building are on hold or interrupted for an extended period of time. Otherwise, a monitoring program must be established following the exceptions guidelines detailed in 3303.13.3. Walk through and make sure the site is clean and housekeeping is in compliance. This is part of your requirements when you have an interrupted or closed site. Heavy machinery is secured and locked, preferably if it's going to be an interrupted site. Hopefully you would have removed it. Ensure proper lockout takeout procedure is being followed for that equipment so that it cannot be accessed during off hours or engaged. Monitor any water accumulation. Again, you must dewater. It shall be pumped out when necessary. Common violations at excavation sites. Work non-conforming to plans per AC 28105.12.2. They're just not following the SOE plan or the sequence. Failure to monitor, inadequate monitoring of the adjoining properties. That's what you see on the right, causing cracks and issues within the adjoining property. Operations that may cause the movement of adjoining property, such as vibrations or shaking or exceedance of threshold limitation during installation of SOE production piles. So if the vibration causes excessive movement, operations would have stopped. If they didn't, you can see that's a fairly common violation. Failure to conduct a baseline and periodic monitoring. Often in the notes, it will note that they needed to establish the baseline and periodic monitor. We get there, we don't see any of that on site. Violations are issued. Failure to have the monitoring equipment, as I just said, on site, and failure to have a pre-construction survey. Very important. I know very often it's difficult to get those pre-construction surveys because the adjoining properties just don't want to let you in to look at their existing cracks. In this one, we see where we had some poor lagging. The picture on the left shows where a blowout incident occurred. On the right shows where it was properly installed, but lagging is a big one. It's got to be done, and the berm's got to be kept there as you go down until it's all in place and secure. Some more common violations are failure to maintain your documents on site. Remember those daily inspections and all of the required documents. No guardrails along the edges of the excavations that are 6 feet or deeper. Failure to protect utilities. No dewatering plan when we see a buildup of water. Failure to protect the adjoining property during excavation activities, very common. And underpinning section not properly braced or shored. And that can cause all sorts of problems, as we know. Let's move on now to gut rehab and interior demo. I'll be focusing on the gut rehab in this portion of the course. There are many issues which are common to both gut rehab and interior demolition. What is gut rehab? Well, for the purposes of the department, we're going to step aside from the real estate industry's definition and just say it's concerning building occupancy class J2 multiple dwellings with a building height greater than or equal to 4 stories, construction class of old code, principally structures with unreinforced masonry walls and wood floor joists, possibly turn of the century balloon frame dwellings with brick noggin walls. That's where they put the bricks in between the studs, and nearly all structures that average an age between 60 and 100 years. While the code reference in the second bullet is from the demolition section of the chapter 33, it applies here because removal and replacement of deteriorated, damaged structural components present a hazard that must be addressed by providing safeguards such as controlled access zone, shoring, sequence of operations, and means and methods. Engineering review and planning will assure existing conditions are addressed on the plan documents. Many gut rehab projects using cold form steel to replace wood joists and floors. Be sure to follow the requirements of Buildings Bulletin 11 of 2019 concerning documents to be kept on site for cold form steel, including records and results of the periodic controlled inspections. Follow all of the required guidelines, including notifications if there's excavation work going on, DEP regulations, and of course, make sure that you maintain your documents on site. Be sure to follow the proper sequence of operations for that. Avoid the removal of floor joists, bottom up interior demolition instead. Avoid removal of floor joists from the bottom up. Avoid removal of excessive numbers or all on floors, joists at one time, and destabilizing exterior walls. Here's an important one. Be sure not to remove too many floor joists at one time, as it may cause destabilization of the exterior walls. Never excavate beneath the level of existing spread and column footings to increase the cellar slab ceiling height without underpinning footing to lower the depth. Demolition of weakened structures. Again, when working in the cellar, underpinning or underfooting to make the foundation deeper, be sure to support the foundation adequately. Per section BC 3306.7, you may need the shoring, bracing, sheeting, and other types of engineered support. You must do the underpinning per BC 3309.5. Where a structure is to be demolished or has been partially wrecked or weakened by fire, you want to make sure that all support has been adequately placed. Remember, these are a lot of the older deteriorated buildings, so you want to investigate and make sure adequate support is supplied throughout. And if you're going to be lowering the cellar floor, you have to make sure that the proper support before undermining any of the column footings is in place. Another one is to be sure the floor joists are properly connected with the masonry wall. While this photo shows the connection of C-joists to masonry, it is important to remember when using wood joists, a 3-inch fire cut bevel is required. And that pretty much concludes us for the rehab portion. Now I'd like to introduce to you our next speaker, Chief Robert Turner, who will be focusing on demolition safety. Take it away, Rob.
Thank you, Craig. Good morning, everybody. My name is Chief Robert Turner, and I'm one of the chiefs in charge of construction safety compliance. In the next section of this presentation, we'll be covering site safety interior demolition, common violations, stalled sites, emailing appointments for pre-demolition, and sign-off. While looking at the common mistakes made by contractors, what is interior demolition? Removing interior structural elements such as columns, walls, floors, and alteration in a systematic manner. Looking at this picture in the slide shows an inadequate sequence of operations. What is a sequence of operations? The order in which your project gets demolished, developed by the P of record. If the sequence is not followed, the building could collapse, which could lead to injury, death, extreme hazards to the public. By following an approved plan and a sequence of operations will help to ensure your project's success. Safety interior demo. Existing structural systems in building being demolished must be examined. Never remove any component of the building without understanding its structural significance. Corroded connections carrying excessive load may lead to building collapse. Excessive load corroded connections are the leading cause for failure. Bearing partitions and headers, if we look at this picture, we can see no relieving walls and its lack of shoring, with sagging joists and downward deflection of wood joists. No shoring of any kind, with the possibility of fire cut joists being dislodged from their beam pocket. The staircase surrounding header beams, and chimney shall be examined and shored if necessary. Shoring shall continue from the cellar through above the successive floors to ensure the safety of the project. Connections. Examination of connections. Lime-rich mortar in older structures is subject to deterioration in older structures when exposed to moisture for long periods. Moisture can transfer to wood structures, which could lead to wood rot and structural instability. Masonry buildings with wood floors, sections of masonry walls shall not be loosened or permitted to fall in such masses as to affect carrying capacity of floors or the stability of structural supports. All demolition must be carried out in a systematic manner. Now we move on to interior demo. In this next slide, we examine existing joist and masonry T-anchors, which will need conditions to be verified. T-anchors are often missing, especially at party walls of row dwellings. This condition can lead to a latent structural failure. Retrofitting may be required to your project. Ensure sequence of plans are followed and no connections are omitted prior to moving on to the next step. These connections are integral during alterations to ensure structural stability is not compromised. As per 28-105.12.2 approved plans, structural details on plans must be followed. Exterior wall framing must be braced. If you see in this picture here, you see the extent of the bracing that's been done. Gypsum sheathing is not an acceptable form of bracing. All bracing must be designed. It's deployed in such an old building that otherwise would collapse without this proper support. When specifications call for gypsum sheathing in an exterior fireproof wall assembly, alternative bracing details, cross bracing, strap bracing, metal diaphragm, etc., must be provided. Close interrupted work sites, gut rehab, and interior demo. Sites must be backfilled in 3 months or less if the site does not plan on resuming work as per 3303.13.3, as mentioned earlier in this segment. Walk through and make sure the site is clean throughout. Housekeeping is compliance with DC 3303.4. Monitor any water accumulation. Accumulated water shall be pumped out when necessary while filling all necessary DEP permits to do so. Ensure maintenance of any temporary construction. Sidewalks should fence, access ramps, etc. Let's discuss common violations for gut rehab and interior demo. Normally, when our inspectors go on site, they are looking for work is contrary to plans to follow sequence of operations. Underpinning sections not properly braced or shored, and certainly others such as housekeeping and piled up flammable combustible debris, overloading floors. All pictures taken from slide 9194 of worker safety from Build Safe 2020. Demolition equipment mechanical. The photos shown here are some examples of mechanical demolition equipment. Photo on the left is a hydraulic breaker showing the worker breaking up the wall. It's important to note that all mechanical devices must be noted on site safety plans, indicated and on all floors, reviewed to sustain the weight of the device. Mechanical use permit must be obtained. Photo on the right is an excavator, which is breaking down steel and concrete parts of the structure. All safety zones must be indicated on the site safety plan. In this next section, we shall be talking about when demo plans are not required, when plans are required, and plan development. When are demolition plans not required? When there's partial demolition. Demolition is limited to handheld devices, including handheld mechanical devices, performed during the course of minor operation. Ordinary repair will no longer require demolition submittal documents. If plans are not required, when a survey needs to be at the job site to verify existing site conditions. Plans are not required for the following types of demos. 1 to 3 family, totally detached, to be performed by hand demo. Semi-attached, both structures are coming down at the same time and demo is performed by hand. Detached accessory structure, for example, a garage, you see in the photo in the rear. Full demolition, detached buildings other than 1, 2, 3 family houses, as garage, example, the garage. Demolition is limited to handheld devices, including handheld mechanical devices. The floor area of the building is less than 5,000 square feet. When are demolition plans required? As per BC 3302.1, definition of a major building. It is existing, if it is an existing or proposed building that is 10 stories or greater, 425 feet tall, has a footprint of 100,000 square foot, or deemed by the commissioner due to the unique hazards associated with the construction or demolition of the structure. Anything that the commission deems that it's a hazard to the public. Any structure that is attached to at least one side. Any structure that will be demolished by mechanical means. Plans, development, and plan examination. For more information regarding plan development, plan examination, please attend the review, site safety demolition plans, code requirements, and alternative provisions at Thursday, May 6th at 10 a.m. to 11 a.m. Register for the upcoming course. When you participate in that course, you will obtain the entire scope of plan review and the requirements for approvals. Pre-demolition. This segment of the presentation will go over the following topics regarding pre-demolition: inspection appointment request, pre-demo inspection, and demo permit. Pre-demo inspection appointment request. To confirm the structure detail on the plans will be demolished. The cover sheet and all of the applicable sections must be filled out. For example, indicate the type of pre-inspection: full demolition, partial demolition. This form is typically used for plan exam, and you can see more of this information on the previous plan exam review on the 6th. Pre-demo inspection appointment request. Once your plans are approved and required items received, you will need to submit the CSC an online PDF appointment request form. The form is to be submitted to CSC U Appointments and Buildings at nyc.gov. Indicate the type of appointment request, in this case, a pre-demo inspection. Mark yes or no in the right of the form is required to be filled out in order to successfully fill out your form. Pre-demolition inspection. Pre-demo inspection is to ensure that the plans or information provided corresponds with what is at the location. Once an inspection has been scheduled, the inspector will visit the site to verify all required information was provided on the appointment request. The plan information matches the structure on site and surrounding structures. Pre-demo inspection. Once the pre-demo inspection is approved, an inspection will be performed. The building must be vacant and unoccupied. No work has been performed prior to the inspection. If the structure is not vacant, the job site will not pass the inspection requirements. Now it comes to permit issuance. Permit issuance. The demolition work permit will only after the plans are reviewed by a DOB plan examiner. CSC performs a pre-demolition inspection and passes the work. Pre-demo inspection is approved by a unit, fulfilling the required items for that permit number. Borough office will then grant a demo permit once all required items have been received. Demo notification. We will now go over briefly demolition notification, demolition filing process, and notification requirements. Demolition administrative process. Upon approval of the demolition plans by CSC Plan Exam Unit, contractor applicant can submit a request for pre-demolition inspection to CSC. On passing that pre-demo inspection, the applicant can request or apply for a permit. The permit can be obtained at the borough office, Manhattan, Bronx, Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island. Notify DOB 24 hours prior to the start of demolition by calling 212-393-2550. Demolition work cannot begin prior to date submitted to. Upon completion of the demolition, submit a request for a sign-off inspection to CSC. Upon passing the demolition sign-off inspection, CSC will enter the information into BIS as assignment. Demolition filing process. Also, demolition notification, section 3306.3 notification. The permit holder shall notify the department adjoining building owners prior to commencement of full and partial demolition operations in accordance with sections 3306.3.1 through 3306.3.2. Exceptions. Notification to department or adjoining owners is not required for partial demolition operations limited to interior of the building. And that provide no mechanical demolition other than handheld devices to be used to demo the building. Notification to department of adjoining owners is not required for partial demolition that occurs on the interior, provided such work is a minor alteration or a theft and is accomplished without any mechanical demolition equipment or other than handheld devices. Please see these sections. 3306.2, protection of pedestrians adjoining properties. We will refer you to 3307, 3308, and 3309. Safety zones. The section has been changed. It's 1/2-to-1 ratio. When you're looking at demos, safety zones have to be on the site safety plan. 3306.3.1, specific requirement to notify the DOB and time frame. Electronically, at least 24 hours, no more than 48 hours prior to commencement of work, which was previously noted. 3306.3.2, adjoining property owners shall be notified of upcoming demolition operations in writing not less than 10 days prior to the scheduled starting date of demolition. Demolition safety, preparing for demolition, full demolition, gut rehab. Demolition safety. This is the demolition segment, and following topics will be discussed. Demolition sequence, safeguards in construction, handheld versus mechanical, debris removal, gut rehab, interior demo, protection of joint blocks. Preparing for demolition. Ensure all safeguards are in place. Construction documents are up to date and on site. Utilities are capped. Establish safety zones as required. Ensure all required permits are obtained. Include permits from other New York State agencies such as DOT, DEP, and FDNY. Ensure compliance with all permits and the site safety plan. Hydrostatic test of entire standpipe system performed and passed prior to demolition. When your building is over 75 feet. Preparing for demolition. As previously referenced in demolition plan segment, a demolition sequence should be followed. Utilities and service lines per BC 3306.9.1. Prior to the removal of any service, the utility connection shall be disconnected and capped, and filed certifications issued by the representative utility company with the department. You must notify 72 hours in advance to the utility company or city agency. As previously mentioned, utilities and lines or existing utilities locations shall be identified. All lines, due to demolition purposes, we've had in the past where they basically would break into a line that wasn't indicated on the plan. There was no survey. Nothing was indicated. So it needs to be safeguarded by the public before such utilities are disturbed. Safety zone. Establish a safety zone around all demolition areas. Mechanical demolition is taking place. Safety zone shall be equal or greater than the height, half the height of the building. Safety zones are important as mechanical means will be implemented in demolition. As previously referenced in demolition plan segment, demolition sequence should be followed. Removal of stories, including hydrostatic tests, entire system to be prior to demolition. We mentioned that already. Standpipe systems during construction, alteration, or demolition. Fire stamp being stated readiness at 75 feet or higher, painted red and maintained as dry standpipe. Public and properties are properly safeguarded. Public protection, sidewalks, walkways, yards shall be protected. Roof overhead protection, adjoining roofs, skylights, and chimneys, mechanical equipment, all protective temporary equipment to be noted on site safety demolition plan. Roof protection would involve planking, plywood, 2-inch foam board. Overhead protections would be sidewalk sheds. Skylights could be scaffolding over protections of scaffolding over skylights, chimneys as well, depending on design plan. All protective temporary equipment to be noted again on the site safety plan. Roof protection is required when a major building's protection is needed 20 feet from the property. The structure to be demolished is 48 inches in height above the adjoining property. Adjoining property of a house is within 5 feet from the property at the sidewalk. Also on adjoining property, all skylights, chimneys, coping, windows need protection and should be indicated on plans. In this picture, in this near miss, 6 workers were working inside a house, performed interior demo. DOB inspector just finished inspection across the street. He noticed the workers had removed load-bearing walls supporting the roof. He yelled over and told the workers that they needed to get out of the house. As the workers were coming out, the roof started to collapse. A preventive measure would have been to check with a licensed professional before demoing the interior walls and follow the demo sequence. As per BC 3306.8.1, structural steel, reinforced concrete, and heavy timber buildings. Demolition of steel, concrete, heavy timber building shall occur 1 column at a time, floor at a time, so as not to affect the stability of the structure. Structural members shall be chained or tied in place to prevent uncontrolled moving. Our next slide covers masonry buildings with wooden floors. Demolition of masonry buildings shall occur in sequence from top to bottom. All demolition work must be completed above each level before removing any structural members. This is extremely important. Masonry walls shall not be permitted to fall, as it can affect the carrying capacity of the floors and structural supports. Walls shall be braced. Body walls, exits, and fire exits. During demolition operations, the following safeguards shall be maintained. Egress. Egress shall not be obstructed. Path of egress cannot be blocked for workers as well as first responders. All exits shall be well marked through proper signage on all floors. Existing structural elements shall be maintained, braced as per demo sequence and approved plans. Fire protection devices shall be on site at all times. Standpipe shall be in the state of readiness, hydrostatic tested prior to demolition operations. All fire extinguishers shall be hung, charged accordance with DOB FDM1 codes. Sanitary safeguards, housekeeping must be maintained at all times. As per 3303.2.4, sanitary facilities must be provided to workers as well. Sanitary facilities shall be provided during construction demolition activities in accordance with NYC plumbing codes. Demolition operations as per BC 3306.9.3, dust. Any operations producing dust shall be wetted down during construction throughout site. Construction sites dust can cause airborne particles like concrete dust to cause silicosis and which can affect the public walking by also as workers on site. Also in demolition operations, as per BC 3306.9.4, water accumulation, which was mentioned previously in this program. Demolition operations shall not interfere with natural surface drainage, except would be if the cellar was to remain. The slab would have to be cracked to allow proper drainage. This would need a waiver from the building department, which can easily be obtained. Conditions would have to be match the conditions on the plan. As per BC 3006.9, temporary elevators and downpipes must be employed for buildings over 75 feet. Existing standpipes to be remained as standpipes during demolition operations, which is previously mentioned. Demolition operations per BC 3306.9.6, sprinkler systems. Existing sprinkler system with fire department hose connection shall be maintained as a non-automatic sprinkler system. If you look at the Siamese in the picture, you can see that obviously it's very hard for them to get to this system. The fire department would have been blocked. The hole is not wide enough and the standpipe does not go out to be accessible. This would be considered a violation. BC 3306.9.6, sprinkler systems. Existing sprinkler systems with fire department hose connection shall be maintained as non-automatic sprinkler. We just said that. Okay. Protection of foundations. Water shall not be permitted to accumulate or damage near foundation or premises nor adjoining property foundations. Drainage of excavations, drainage of accumulation, water shall be maintained. Accumulated water shall be maintained throughout the site. Demolition operations in dangerous areas, 3307.4.2. As we look at this picture on the right, we can see inherent danger that happens on many sites. Freestanding acetylene oxygen compressed gases, BC 3313.1, can be tipped over and can lead to serious incident on site. Picture on left is marked and its cage. It's in its cage after its use, which is the proper function. Areas where special dangers exist, warning signs shall be provided. Special dangers include but not limited to vehicle entrances, exits, hoisting areas, and areas where combustible materials are being stored. This is a good chunk of fire code violations that inspectors are well trained in writing. Areas open to non-workers. For areas that are open to persons other than workers, a flag person shall be provided. You will find these when operations have to cross the sidewalk. We will temporarily close these areas for non-construction personnel for their safety. 3306.9.9, stairs. Stairs shall be maintained and closed during demolition, except for the topmost floor being demolished. Good part of this is the staircase usually is a fire stop for the fire department. It acts as a safety. If there's a fire, they still need fire protection going up the staircase. Debris chutes. As per 3303.5.5, the chute shall conform to manufacturer specs and approved plan drawings. Plan shall indicate detailed information on how the chute shall be used. Debris chutes are at an angle of over 45 degrees shall be enclosed on all sides. Debris chutes at an angle of less than 45 may be open on the upper side. Debris chute shall be rigidly and braced and supported for its entire length. Chutes have metal plates inside direct flow of debris while falling. A gate shall be provided at the lower end of the chute to control the material loading into trucks. Debris chutes over 75 feet heat shall be composed of non-combustible materials. Debris chute permits. Debris chute permits. Permits and design drawings are required for debris chutes. Design drawings shall be prepared by a registered design professional. They are not required. Chutes installed on buildings in height or 40 feet or in height or less. Chutes installed in accordance with manufacturer's design. Chutes not attached to impart a load on scaffolds. (3309) Protection of joining property. In the picture, you see a building covered in waterproofing. 3309.9 Weatherproofing integrity of adjoining buildings. Processes would be bending over and flashing all roofing material of adjoining buildings, sealing, permanently waterproofing all doors and other openings in party walls, properly sealing all cornices where cut, pointing up and make waterproof any marks and parapets, any walls that have been disturbed, removing all exposed furring plaster on party walls, and removing and replacing, firmly anchoring any loose wall materials. Demolition sign-off. Our next topic will be inspection, appointment request, and demo sign-off inspection. The purpose of demo sign-off inspection is for the department to confirm the final condition of the job site. The form must include a cover sheet, and all applicable sections must be filled out. Indicate it's a demo sign-off inspection. Are you ready for demolition sign-off? Any exposure at the adjoining property wall that needs to be inspected is okay to remove the job site fence if there is any. Ensure the site is graded. It is not graded. If it is not graded, the plan should depict the final condition. The plan should also indicate site burned, if applicable, with a guardrail system. Fence needs to be back at the lot line except where DOT permit is active. You can see that on the as a nice picture of the actual form that you would have to submit. Completion of demolition process operations. All work required for structural stability and permanent waterproofing of adjacent buildings must be completed prior to demolition sign-off. Buildings must be completely demolished, site graded. All debris must be removed from the site and fully backfilled.